Thank you, Tom. I'm gonna prepare you now. We're gonna do some praying at the end of the sermon, and since we're also live streaming, it's going to be a little interesting how we're going to do that. We're going to try it like we do a lot of things. We try them. Sometimes they don't work perfectly, but that's okay. We're okay if they don't work exactly the way we want them to. So at the end of the message, we're going to actually be praying in small groups, preferably with the people you're already sitting with or around, spending time around, so that we're not spreading more of the germs than we have to. And we're actually going to be praying together, so be prepared for that. If you're not with someone, you find someone that you can pray with, at least one other person, and we're going to be praying out loud together. For some, that's going to be a challenge because you're not used to that. In fact, when I was growing up, we grew up in the church. My mom was a PK, a preacher's kid. My dad was an elder in the church, and we went faithfully. We participated in everything. We had great discussions, but we just didn't do the family time devotionals, praying out loud. We weren't used to that. If we were asked to pray in Sunday school, we would do it. If we're in that environment, we would do it. And so one Sunday, we're all teenagers, and our church the congregation had grown really large, and the minister was doing a time when, at the end of this service, everybody was going to pray together and get in with your families and get in groups like we're going to do today. And so our family was kind of off to the side. We were actually in a place we didn't normally sit, and we were off to that side, and I think we had some of our longtime friends possibly with us who had joined our group. And about, 5-10 minutes in, the minister comes up, and he gently interrupts and says, "I heard some laughing, and immediately I knew it was the Penrods." Because we had been spending most of that time awkwardly talking and making jokes, because that's how we deflect, in any serious times, any serious moments, emotionally high times. And I think we eventually prayed, or at least someone in our group prayed for us or something along those lines. So believe me, if you're not used to this, I'm with you. I understand, and that's okay. But we need to be stretched, and so we're going to be stretching ourselves this morning. I'm not going to make you do anything, but I'm going to encourage you to stretch yourself. And we're going to be reading from Luke chapter, that's one of the lesser known chapters in Luke. Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 39. And this is, Jesus is, he's with his disciples. This was like their family now, because these guys had spent 3 years together, traveling around, eating together. Jesus had just washed their feet. He's their Lord, their master. He's the one, their rabbi. He's the one they're learning from. He is the promised anointed one from God, the one who is going to save Israel. He is all of these things, and he just washed their feet. They ate a meal together where he said, "Look, this is my body and this is my blood." We just celebrated that ourselves as a congregation. And they go out from that place, and accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room and went, as usual, to the Mount of Olives. I love that. I love that because this is something that they did together regularly. This was a practice that they had. They went to the Mount of Olives because that was the place that they would kind of get together to have those serious moments. You might have a place where you do that. For us, it tends to be in the car more often than anywhere else. Doesn't mean we don't have other times and other places, but just for our family to get everybody, probably because the kids can't get away. That's probably why they're all forced to face forward. They're strapped in. They can't move very much. That might be why. But this was the place where Jesus had those serious moments. Maybe in your life you've had some of those experiences, those moments. Church camp can be a great place for that. Growing up, for us, it was actually at church. So the meeting at the building was often that, not because of the building itself, but because of the people who were there. So you can have that with your individual family. You can have that with others, other believers. And this was where they, when they were in Jerusalem, they would go to the Mount of Olives, which is really, you've got Jerusalem, and then you have a valley, and then you have the Mount of Olives, and it's kind of like two hills. And we it's elevated, but you can walk it in about 15 minutes. And so these guys were singing as they went. We get that from some of the other Gospels. They were singing psalms as they were walking to this place. So this is a night of seriousness because they know what's coming. Jesus has warned them what's coming. But it's also a night of worship. It's a night where they're gathered together. And this is kind of the continuation of them as this tight, close-knit group, this family. Jesus, in fact, calls them his brothers. And so they go, as usual, to the Mount of Olives. Some of you may be familiar, the Garden of Gethsemane, if you've heard that, okay, the Garden of Gethsemane. And we believe that that area is still there, that some of the trees are still there, a couple of the trees are still there. You can go and visit that spot, and some of those trees they're ancient trees. And we believe that is the location where the garden was, and you can walk through there. And there's of course, in Jerusalem and the surrounding area, there's been a church built on every site possible. Oh, this is where Jesus spit. Let's build a church there. Quite literally, because he healed a guy with spit. But that is kind of what you see there. But you can go and visit these places. And Jesus went there with his disciples. They're worshiping. And verse 40, there he told them, pray that you will not give in to temptation. Now, I want to pause and sit on this for just a moment because we read this verse and we think something completely different from what is happening this night. We read this verse, maybe we take this verse, sometimes we hear it quoted, sometimes we see it used, and it's not bad advice just generically. I mean, this is good advice. Pray that you will not give in to temptation. We can all do that. We can all practice that. We can all make that a part of the way we live our lives. But that's not what is going on here, the way we think of this. Jesus isn't saying, look, guys, I'm about to die, so the rest of your lives, pray this. Jesus is saying to his disciples, I'm about to be arrested, I'm about to be crucified. Pray that you don't turn to the right or turn to the left. Pray that you don't go off course with what I have been teaching you. And that emphasis that just happened, we talked about last week, where he displayed love through servant leadership. Because Jesus is love, his character demanded that this was how he treat them, what he did for them, to show them what the cross was, that the cross was the ultimate act of that servant leadership, of that love. And that's the context within which Jesus is telling them to pray that you will not give into temptation. It's a here and now, in this moment. We have a mission, I have a mission to fulfill, and you are a part of that, but in a different way than I am. Because, I mean, these guys were like, yeah, Jesus, we'll be right there with you. We'll die for you. And Jesus is like, no, you won't. Not just because they're afraid, not just because Peter's like, we talk about Peter, how he betrays Jesus, and yes, he does. But Jesus didn't want Peter standing next to him on trial. Jesus didn't want Peter on the cross next to him. Jesus wanted Peter to carry his cross throughout his life so that others could come to faith in Christ. Pray that you will not give into temptation. He's saying to these men in this place at this time, right before he's about to be arrested, you guys, this is going to be hard. What is coming is going to be the hardest thing that you're going to go through. We believe that it was the hardest thing Jesus went through. Pray that you will not give in to temptation. So what is temptation there? Let's keep reading. We'll come back to that. Verse 41. He walked away about a stone's throw. We'll assume these guys were all young, like 20s and early 30s, that they could actually throw a stone a decent distance. But it wasn't super far. He was just kind of going off a little bit in private. So he's groups there. He tells them to pray. Some of the other Gospels say a couple of the disciples kind of were closer to him than others. And then he went away from them even. And he kind of encouraged some of them to pray more and chastised some of them about them praying some more, if we read those other Gospels. But he's by himself and he prays. Kneels down and prays, Father, if you are willing, please take this cup of suffering away from me. But I want your will to be done, not mine. In this last moment, Jesus asks for relief from this. Because it's not just death that he is going to, it's not just death that he is facing. Jesus had the Spirit. If we could think of anybody who lived life on this planet who had the Spirit more, there is nobody we could think of that had the Spirit more than Jesus. We could think of Moses, and we could think of Elijah and Elisha, and we could think of the great things that God did in their lives, and yet Jesus had the Spirit. And he prays this, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. And then, verse 43, Luke tells us an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. An angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. And so what does Jesus do when he is strengthened? He gets up, he marches out. No. What does he do? Verse 44, he prayed more fervently. He prayed harder. And he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. Now don't misread this here. It wasn't just that he was like, you know how sometimes when you're working really hard out in the sun and you're just like dripping sweat, or maybe you're sick and you don't know why, but you're just dripping sweat. The reference here to being like drops of blood is the extreme stress and agony that Jesus was under, that the body physically sweated something that was like blood, if not blood. And we know that medically that this can happen. Luke was a doctor, and it's interesting that he includes this here. I don't know if he knew that could happen normally, but he just trusted that it did. He's, of course, Luke was interviewing those apostles and those disciples who had firsthand knowledge, who had spent time. So Luke got these accounts, and he includes this in there. And these guys, it says that Jesus sweated, his sweat fell like drops of blood. Verse 45, at last he stood up again and returned to the disciples, only to find them asleep, exhausted from grief. Now, if you read some of the other, a couple of the other Gospels and you read this account, we aren't given this little insight. And I think that's interesting. Luke was not there, but he interviews people. And he's adding this bit of information that we don't see elsewhere, that they, we might read some of those other passages and be real hard on these guys, like, come on, guys, Jesus was about to be crucified, and you couldn't stay awake for, just a little bit of time. Raise your hand if you've ever fallen asleep while praying. Everybody in here should be raising their hand. Yeah. Okay. And it's been a long journey. It's been tiring. It's been exhausting. But Luke tells us they were exhausted from what? Grief. Because grief is exhausting. Sometimes it's the most exhausting thing. Because you can be physically exhausted, you can have other stresses, and just still keep plowing through and pay for it later. But grief, sometimes we just have to stop. It just shuts us down. And so Jesus found them asleep, and he says to them, why are you sleeping? Verse 46, why are you sleeping? And he asks them, get up and pray. Here it is again. So that you will not give in to temptation. Get up and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. Jesus, in this moment, is wanting them to pray this. Again, you can take this as generic, good wisdom principle. You can take it and you can utilize that. But right here and right now, what Jesus is saying to them is that he wants them to continue. In the midst of his betrayal by Judas, in the midst of his trials, both by the Jewish leadership and the Roman leadership, in the midst of his crucifixion, in the midst of his death and burial, he wants them to continue. So what are the temptations that they might be facing at this time and in this place? If we keep reading and we read all of the accounts, we see that Judas comes and he betrays Jesus by identifying him to the religious leaders, and so that he can be arrested, because it's dark out and they don't have street lights and they don't have, and when Judas does that, they go to arrest Jesus, and the disciples, they're tired. They know Jesus has said that this is going to happen, but they still want action. Right? You've been there. You just want some action. You want something to happen that, your reasoning may be good, your heart may be in the right place, but you just want action. So one of the disciples pulls out a sword and cuts a guy's ear off. I don't know if it's because he just didn't have any practice with the sword, or if he was a little bit afraid to use it. You know how you kind of like, you feel a little bit of gumption and a little bit of courage, but you still have that fear there, and you're just like, do it half-heartedly. It's good that he didn't do more than that, because that's not what Jesus was asking his disciples to do. What was it that they were tempted to do? I'm going to throw out two opposite ends, and then you can fill in with anything in between. But I think the temptation here for the two ends were to leave the mission. It's not going the way I thought it would. This guy I'm following, he's going to be, he's going to be crucified. I believed in him. I gave him all this time. I invested in this. And it's not turning out the way I thought it should. Been there? And so I think one side of that temptation is to to just be done with it. I'm not seeing the results I thought I should see, so I'm just going to quit. I'm not getting out of it what I think I should get out of it, so I'm just going to stop going. You've heard that. You may have thought that. You may have done that. The other end of the temptation, the other side, I guess the other extreme of the temptation is, I have spent all this time investing in this. I've spent all this time with Jesus. I believed all this time. I am not going to let this go. I am going to take matters into my own hands. That's a temptation. I've been there. I've done that. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. This didn't turn out how I expected it to. It's not working out the way I wanted. So force it. Try harder. Make it work. Have you done that before? And in this moment, this is a serious moment for the disciples, because in this is a pivotal moment for all of humanity. No pressure, right, guys? All the more reason that they pray. And you have had and will have pivotal moments in the life of your family, in the interactions with those around you. We know they're pivotal moments because sometimes we miss them and we think later, nuts. I recognize now that that was kind of a serious moment for me to say something or do something, and I completely missed that one, right? Have you been there? The disciples, in this pivotal moment, I'm going to suggest that their temptation was not just like what Peter did. Jesus knew Peter was going to do that. He acknowledged it to Peter, told him ahead of time that he would do it, and he still loved Peter and set him up to shepherd the new church. I think the real temptation here that these disciples were going through was to fight or flee. We have a response for that, right? When your adrenaline rushes into your body, it's the fight or flight response. Physically, it's built into us. And so we're, times when we may not normally do something, when that adrenaline kicks in, we're ready to do that thing. We're able to do that thing. Like moms lifting cars up off their children. Has happened. I mean, I could lift the Hot Wheels off, or the Power Wheel off even. We know that it exists. In that moment, sometimes we're tempted to fight or flee. But neither of those responses fulfill the mission that Christ was calling these disciples to. And those responses don't, from us, in any moment, whether it's pivotal or not, those responses from us don't fulfill the mission that Christ has called us to. They also don't honor God. It's hard. And we go through these moments ourselves. Never will this exact moment that we are reading about happen again. Never. It's happened, it's done. Christ has been crucified. God raised him from the dead. And we now can have life through him with his Spirit dwelling with us to strengthen us and encourage us, and yet we will still go through these times. Through trials. Through times where we've invested something and we're frustrated. We're scared. We hurt. We just are unsure. And so even though we won't be in this exact moment the disciples went through, we go through these experiences also. And we have all been tempted to fight. Some of us more tempted than others. Right? To argue, to force it, to make it happen, to take matters into our own hands. See a lot of that lately. And we've all been tempted to just give up. Forget it. It's not worth it. We've all been there. And so the same prescription, the same instruction, the same teaching, the same the doing what they did is what we are called to do. Pray. This isn't pray that you don't give in to temptation to any sin or any particular sin. If you're struggling with something, that's okay to pray about that. It's good to pray about that. But you will have those times where you stumble. This is pray that you do not give in to the temptation to fight or to flee. To take matters into your own hands or to wash them. Do you understand the metaphor there? To wash your hands of it. Kids, do you understand what that means, to wash your hands? Not literally. To wash your hands of something means to take no accountability, no responsibility, that it's not don't have anything to do with it anymore. You know, like when a parent is yelling because someone did something wrong and you're like, "Whoop, wasn't me." Right, kids? You've all done that? Wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. I mean, I might have stood there watching, laughing, egging them on, but I didn't do that. So we can't take matters in our own hands, and we can't wash our hands of this, so what do we do? Oh man, this is so preachery. You're going to hate me for this. We fold our hands. If our hands are folded, we can't be taking matters into them, and we can't be washing them. Isn't that so preachery? That's terrible. I'm ashamed I just did that. But if it helps you remember, if it helps us remember, then let's do it. I mean, sometimes it's those simple kid things that help us remember. Jesus, when he was praying, he got down on his knees. I did that recently, and it had been a long time, and I was like, wow. I didn't realize it had been so long since I'd gotten on my knees to pray. So in your life, what can you pray about so that you don't give up to temptation? I'm going to mess this up and mangle this because we've got a lot of things going on. I took too long to preach, so I'm gonna put up a slide with some ideas for prayer. These are just generic in general. They don't specifically go with, I didn't do the hand thing up there, and they don't, go with the fighting or the fleeing or anything like that. It's just if you're trying to pray and you can't think of anything, That's what that's there for, okay? And that's fine. That's okay. Use that. Pray through that. Take some time to listen. So we've got that up. Hopefully our online viewers can see that. And what I'm going to do is we're going to actually go ahead and kind of group in our small groups 2 people together, or your family or whatever. And yes, this is where we're going to get uncomfortable. You can move in the room. If you are super distracted, you can go out into the entryway and sit in the chairs there. You can go anywhere you want. I am going to ask you to come back though, because we do have another song to sing, and we do have some announcements. But I want to take 5 minutes to pray. So we're going to end our online service now, Ellie. And